Good afternoon, and welcome to Thursdays with Friends. This is an online chat conversation on current issues that you care about, that we care about. This program is brought to you by the Friends Committee on National Legislation, a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. I'm the show's producer, Leslie Wolf-Bear-Pinkham, and here's our chat host for Thursdays with Friends, FCNL General Secretary Diane Randall, and our guest, Kerri Colfer, who's the congressional advocate for the Native Advocacy Program. And this is today's program, Love Thy Neighbor, Native Americans. Thanks.
Thank you, Wesley, and welcome everyone onto this Thursdays with Friends chat. We have started this about 6 weeks ago, and we'll be doing this every 2 weeks. I am really thrilled that Kerri Colfer is with us today. And I'm also thrilled that all of you are with us. One of the delights of FCNL is the community of people who are engaged with this, people who are donors, people who are activists. And so when we can't travel to see you and you don't travel to Washington to see us, we miss you. So this is a wonderful way for us to see you directly, to hear from you. I just want to remind you that you can put questions in the chat. If you type them in, we'll see them, and we are going to have time at the end. We will try to get to some of your questions. Kerri, if we can't answer all questions on this chat, I know Kerri has already engaged with many of you in lots of different ways. So let me get started here by talking a little bit about FCNL's Native American program before I introduce Kerri. So since FCNL started in 1943, we've really carried concerns of Native Americans and Alaska Native communities. Initially, we had volunteers who helped lead this program. And eventually we were doing some work with the Mennonite Central Committee and continue to have the program grow. FCNL has advocated for federal recognition of many tribes as government entities. We've also strengthened grassroots support for adequate funding for schools and healthcare. We have worked on the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and the Indian Child Welfare Act. In the 1970s, Nebraska Yearly Meeting Friends established a Native American fund to help support the work at FCNL. That was initially, as I said, led by Friends in Washington, then by interns, and eventually our former legislative director, Ruth Flower, led this program. And when Ruth retired in FCNL, she helped us establish this as a permanent program that would provide a 27-month fellowship for someone early in their career in Native American policy to help develop stronger advocacy for FCNL's work and to support the individuals who we have selected to work with us at the beginning of their careers to understand advocacy and to work in coalition in Washington, D.C. for federal advocacy. So I want to just acknowledge that many of you have been financial supporters specifically of this program, as well as supporters of FCNL. And I really want to thank you for that, because it does make a difference for our ability to carry out these programs. Our guest is Kerri Colfer. She joined FCNL in September of 2019 as our second congressional advocate for Native American program. Many of you got to know Lesina Unko, who was our first congressional advocate, who is now working in Washington, D.C. with a Native American organization. We are so thrilled that Kerri has joined us. She came to us from Philadelphia, where she finished law school. She worked at Temple Legal Aid Office, helping both clients with a disability and in family law matters. So Kerri, welcome. Say hello.
Thanks, Diane. I also want to thank everyone who's watching us today for supporting the Native program and wanting to learn more about the issues we worked on. It's been really great for me to work on Native policy on the Hill, but I think right now I'm especially grateful to have this platform to bring awareness to the needs of Native Americans during a time where we could really easily be overlooked and where that neglect would have devastating consequences for our communities. So again, thanks everyone for being here today.
And Kerri, you've been lobbying very directly on this COVID-19 legislation and paying attention to what's been happening in Washington, D.C. And many people have, all of us, I'm sure, have read media news clips about the real challenges in Indian country for getting these resources to Native American communities. But before we talk specifically about that legislation, can we start a little bit broader, and can you just give us a little bit of overview of Indian country today?
Sure. So right now there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, 229 of which are located in Alaska. And for those of you I haven't had the chance to meet or speak with yet, I'm Alaska Native. I'm Tlingit from the Kagwantan clan. So it's important for me to highlight those numbers. But I think another fact a lot of people aren't aware of is that over 70% of natives live in urban areas. So it's important that we remember that we're all on native land, and Indian country is diverse. And so there are a lot of diverse needs when it comes to services and programs, and definitely during a health crisis like this.
And clearly, I think one of the themes that we've had as we've talked about this in other Thursdays with Friends, with Amelia in the first one, with Jose Was in the second one, is how much this pandemic has highlighted the underlying issues of injustice and lack of access to particularly essential human needs. So can you talk a little bit about the pandemic in relation to Indian country as you've seen it, and then also let's get into talking about the legislation.
Sure. So right now, coronavirus is really revealing all of the ways, like you said, that the system has failed to provide for Indian country. A lack of access to clean water, electricity, internet access, as well as the high rate of overcrowding in housing has made it difficult for Native people to actually follow social distancing orders and receive up-to-date information about the virus. Healthcare, housing, infrastructure are all chronically underfunded in Indian country. And now we're really seeing the results of that, where Indian health facilities barely have enough staff and resources for daily operations, let alone to respond to a pandemic. And in addition, Native people have higher rates of diabetes and heart and respiratory illnesses than the rest of the country, which puts them at a higher risk for complications from coronavirus. And even these health disparities, they're not a coincidence. They're a result of underfunding of tribal programs and lack of resources over the course of decades and generations. So we're really seeing tribes fall behind the rest of the country in their ability to deal with coronavirus. And that's directly related to how Native people have been historically neglected.
At this point, Congress has passed 3 coronavirus relief packages. The last one, what we call the CARES Act, was pretty significant. And there has been resources in those bills. And again, I think it's noteworthy to say that there has been bipartisan support to advance that legislation to try to provide relief to the enormous economic devastation that people are experiencing because of unemployment. And some of that relief was targeted for specific populations, including Native Americans. Will you talk a little bit about what was in the package, as well as some of the challenges that have ensued in getting that money to end users, so to speak?
Sure. So Indian country did receive emergency funding in the previous coronavirus relief packages so far. And this is in part because we have more Native American representation in Congress than we've ever had before. So I'm really grateful for their advocacy to make sure that Indian country hasn't been forgotten during this time. But it wasn't until this Monday of this week that the Treasury announced it would begin distributing those funds to tribes and Indian health facilities. So this is a really dangerous delay that Indian country couldn't afford to have. And not to mention that tribes had to jump through a lot of hoops in order to get that funding, having to fill out a lot of paperwork in a very short amount of time and meet reporting requirements, which states didn't have to do. So this is really putting a huge burden on smaller tribes who don't have capacity. And tribes are supposed to be treated equally with states, and therefore they shouldn't have had to apply for this funding in the first place. And in addition, the funding includes federally recognized tribes. So tribes that aren't federally recognized are left out.
And one of the, again, just responding to what we've been hearing the news about Navajo Nation and some of the real extreme situations there with regard to COVID-19. Any updates for listeners on that?
Well, I think to put things into perspective, the Navajo Nation spans across parts of Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, and it's larger than 10 US states. So it's larger than Connecticut, New Jersey, West Virginia. I don't think a lot of people realize that. And right now it has the third highest infection rate in the country, behind New York and New Jersey. So unfortunately, they're an example of what happens when the federal government fails every step of the way for a long period of time to provide for the needs of tribes.
Kerri, your work before we really kind of pivoted a little bit to focus on COVID-19 has been looking at legislation that is addressing family violence and the need, and specifically a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act and assuring that there are provisions for tribal justice. How does that relate to this work that we're doing right now in advocating for more resources to address COVID-19, as well as what are the, where do we see movement going forward?
So, as we know, Native women already experience the highest rates of sexual and domestic violence in this country, which is why we advocate for tribal provisions in the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, and why we had a lobby training a few days ago. But right now with coronavirus, we're seeing a spike in these cases due to stay-at-home orders, forcing victims to shelter with their abusers. In Indian country, a lack of resources and shelters having to close their doors, an inability to access the internet, as well as tribes having to put existing funding towards other things in order to respond to the coronavirus. It's really making it difficult for victims to get help, and they're having to stay in really dangerous situations. And that's why FCNL, Native organizations and advocates, along with a bipartisan group of senators, are calling for a tribal set-aside for victim services in the next package. And many of these programs are actually authorized under VAWA. So we're really able to see how important our work is on this bill, because right now it's providing so many important programs for tribes and victims in the middle of this pandemic. And this has really been something that FCNL has been leading on in the faith community.
And Kerri, I just want to remind people, I think a lot of people know how FCNL works in Washington, that we have lobbyists who are on the Hill, like Kerri, who are meeting with congressional offices. And we also do a lot of work in coalition. And Kerri helps provide leadership among a set of faith-based organizations on these issues. But Kerri, you also work with others, other coalition partners, particularly Native American organizations. Do you want to just say a word or two about that and how you're working together?
Sure. So we've been working a lot with the National Congress of American Indians and the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, as well as the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, just to make sure that we are all advocating for the same things, and we're putting, the strength of our numbers behind getting relief for Indian country, and we're really working together on that. So it's been really great to work with other Native partners on these issues that I'm really passionate about, and that the faith community really, needs a voice in.
Thanks. So a reminder that we are going to open this up for some questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to those soon. There also are questions Wesley may be bringing to us from the other platforms other than Zoom that are also showing this chat today. So if we have other questions, please pass those along. I do want to refer you to our website, because the website is the basis for how you can get involved and take action. So if you go to fcnl.org/relief, you will see, and Stephen, thank you, just put up that onto the chat. You can see the web address where you can go to write a letter to your member of Congress about these issues. We are also very much encouraging advocates in the FCNL community to participate in virtual lobbying. We've had some success in actually organizing groups of 3 or 4 constituents to set up a virtual meeting with their lobby offices. And the steps for how to do that are also on our website. So if you are interested in doing that on this issue or on some of the other issues that we work on, please join us by going to that website and getting more information. Jim's just put up the address for that. And then finally, one more plug before we turn back to Kerri for remarks. Kerri also produces a monthly newsletter called the Native American Legislative Update. Comes out once a month. And anyone can subscribe to that. You have to sign yourself up. We don't automatically send it to you. But if you're interested in just getting monthly updates, please do sign up for that newsletter. So let's see what kinds of questions we have, because I think that we've seen some coming in. Let me go back up here for just a minute. So one question we have from Chuck is, in the past, it says tribal governments have reached out to other countries for aid, nation to nation, when the US has failed them. Do you see any of that happening with this pandemic?
So actually, I'm sure a lot of you saw in the headlines just this past week that Ireland actually donated a pretty big sum to tribes in the US. And they did it to repay tribes, the Choctaw Nation who donated to the Irish potato famine. So it was a really nice way to sort of show solidarity. And I think, everyone, all countries are dealing with this right now. And so that was really, really a nice gesture. So yeah, I really liked that story. You can look it up. It's in the recent headlines.
Well, what it does is also just understand the sovereignty question, which is an ongoing issue, right? That is constantly being addressed.
Yeah, and I think sovereignty is so important right now, and that's another thing we're really advocating for, is for tribes to be consulted about the funding and how it's distributed and how it can be used, because tribes are, like I said, Indian country is diverse. And so tribes are in the best position to know how to care for their communities and how to put that money into the places that matter. So yeah, sovereignty really is what underlies everything that we work on.
And you referred to earlier, Kerri, the fact that there are at least two women who got elected to the House in 2018, but there's also, I think there's a rep from Representative Colfer from Oklahoma. Are there, at this point, are there any US senators who are Native American or Alaska Native?
Let me think. I might be blanking. Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it either, but I just want to underscore how that voice makes a difference. It makes a difference both in terms of advocating specifically for these issues, but just awareness, just the fact that people are paying attention, that this is a population that is represented in our US Congress is a huge step forward.
Yeah, and I think with seeing more Native Americans elected to these offices, we not only have those individuals advocating on our behalf, but they're really, getting other members of Congress to be champions on these issues. And so we're having more and more people advocate for us in our communities. And that's, what we really need. And that's why we have lobbying, that's why we ask everyone here to take action and to update, their members of Congress on these issues, because we do need more people speaking about it for us.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions combined. We've had people ask us about Native Hawaiians, but we've also had people ask us about other tribes that are not federally recognized or even recognized by their state governments. Can you comment on any of those, kind of a series of questions, I guess, about that?
Yeah, so that's where we fall into where I said tribes are having to jump through hoops constantly, whether it's, for coronavirus relief or just for funding for other things. And that, they have to go through all of these hurdles, but then they also have to be federally recognized. And that's another issue. And that's really where colonization comes into play, because we as sovereign people are relying on the federal government to tell us that we're sovereign people almost, and to recognize us. And so, yeah, that's a really, really difficult thing, especially for Hawaiians. And in Alaska, we don't have the same reservation system as the lower 48. And so we've been left out of a lot of legislation as well, because we are not considered to be in Indian country, because we don't have those actual borders, despite the fact that, like I said, there are 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska. So yeah, those are the effects of colonization that we're really seeing have a negative impact on Native people, but especially during coronavirus, when we really rely on that funding.
Kerri, one person was asking about the de-establishment of the Mashpee Wampanoag Reservation tribe, and you wrote about that in the last Native American legislative update. What's the status, and what can you say about that?
Yeah, so I first want to say thank you to everyone who's reached out to me about that and who's worked on that. That just really made me so happy that so many people cared about that because, as you know, the Mashpee tribe was disestablished, the reservation was disestablished right around the time where, we were all starting to quarantine. And so there were other things on people's minds. And I think I was so touched that so many people still cared and still wanted to do something about this when we're all going through a really difficult time. So right now, the status is that there's a hearing today, actually. I mean, I know a lot of you have written letters to the court, as well as to Senator Hoeven and Department of Interior, requesting that an injunction be placed on the disestablishment. And also there is a bill, HR 312, I believe, that would sort of aid this cause by reestablishing the reservation that we've asked people to support, along with a carcieri fix, which sort of, it deals with this issue of putting land into trust for tribes, not just the Mashpee, but for all tribes. So yeah, right now things are very up in the air. I haven't had a chance to see if anything's happened yet with the hearing, but it's just really unfortunate that this is happening in general to a sovereign nation that has such ties to this country and to first contact with, but also that it's happening to this tribe during a pandemic.
And Kerri, I know the scope of your work is not to know the status of all the sovereignty issues, but we did have someone ask about the Nez Perce tribe, or I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, the Nez Perce, N-E-Z Perce tribe in Idaho. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm familiar with the tribe, but I'm not really sure. I'm not able to comment on that issue right now.
Okay, thanks. All right, so a couple of questions that I think are interesting to ask is this. Given the resistance of the administration for perhaps adequately, maybe an understatement, assuring that there are resources available, someone asked, is it worthwhile to keep advocating for more funding? This is an easy question.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile. I know, like I said, we did receive funding in the previous packages, but it's never going to, fully make up for how behind Indian country is. I mean, just in terms of infrastructure. So yeah, it's always, helpful to advocate for more funding so that tribes can do more than just survive, so they can actually thrive, so they can have what they need to have a better quality of life for their communities.
One of the things that, again, just back to what the pandemic has pointed out in terms of the existing federal policies that have really created such injustice and such inequality, particularly among populations, people of color. But I feel like the question is really one I think about, how do we all together begin to think about what changes have to happen at the federal policy level to reverse those decades of institutional racism and structural racism that exist? And we believe that many of the advocacy steps that we're taking right now are steps toward that. In itself, additional funding in the COVID package is not the answer for everything. It is one step forward. And so I think that that's important to remember. And I think just, going back to the underlying work that we've been focused on in trying to address some of the health disparities, both the issues within VAWA around violence, public health issues of family violence and justice in that area. But also another one, Kerri, that I think you've been doing a little bit of work with is the Special Diabetes Fund. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. So in the recent coronavirus packages, the Special Diabetes Program for Indians was extended through to November. But what we are actually advocating for is a long-term extension. Initially it was extended until May 22nd. Now it's extended until November. We really need it to, we can't keep sort of kicking it down the road in very short increments. We really need this program to be funded more and to be funded for a longer time so that tribes can, and Indian health facilities can respond to the high rates of diabetes in the Native population.
Yeah. I'm just going to acknowledge that there were a couple of questions about the Alaska corporations that we're actually not going to talk about. That is not an issue that we're focused on right now. So I don't feel like we can really address that, but I appreciate your questions about it. As you know, our work at FCNL and the work of our lobbyists is really almost exclusively focused on Congress and on members of Congress, which is why it's it's valuable for all of you to engage with us. So whether you're living in South Dakota or Massachusetts or Idaho or Oklahoma, it is incredibly helpful for us that you talk to your own members of Congress. And I'm going to repeat again that there is a location on FCNL's website where you can take action. It is fcnl.org/relief. And if you go to that, you can take action on this issue. And there are other issue areas that you can also take action on. But particularly right now, we are trying to continue to raise the visibility of the needs in Indian country related to coronavirus, and specifically around the questions of tribal justice. Okay, Kerri, anything else you want to add now before we're kind of coming to a time when we probably need to wrap up, but any general comments you'd like to make?
Just that I am, I'm really thankful for everyone's support and for everyone who, has been reaching out to me and wanting to take action and really do something about this and be great allies. We need it now more than ever. So please contact your members of Congress using the link that we posted on fcnl.org/relief. But Ganesh Chish, thank you.
Thank you, Kerri. And Kerri, if people, didn't you recently have something published in the Hill newspaper too?
Yeah, I had over the weekend an op-ed posted about coronavirus and just generally how it's impacting tribes and all of the issues that have led up to the inequalities in tribes right now with coronavirus. So that was in the Hill. Oh, Stephen, I think linked it.
Great, thanks.
He's very fast.
So please do read that as well. Part of our strategy, in addition to encouraging all of you to take action, having our lobbyists on the Hill, is also getting letters to the editor and publishing op-eds. And I know there are folks on this call who have participated with us in that, and it does make a difference. And particularly if you get a letter published in your local community, sending that letter to your member is another way to actually just extend your advocacy and your lobbying. So we're thrilled if you can participate that way. I want to note that FCNL has a broad array of issues that we are asking Congress to pay attention to in the next COVID-19 relief package that we think will be, that is already being discussed. It's not on the floor. There's not a bill yet. And we will be putting more information up on our website. So please keep coming back and taking a look for that information. I want to reiterate that in 2 weeks, Hassan Al-Tayeb will be my guest on this little chat. Hassan is our legislative representative from Middle East policy, and it'll be really interesting to hear him talk about the impact of COVID-19 in Yemen and in Iran in particular. So I hope you'll join us then. And also just to let you know that we also have a monthly Quaker Changemaker event that happens at the Quaker Welcome Center. And the next one is May 20th. And Nozizwe Malala Rutledge, who is a South African friend, will be joining us. Nozizwe was actually served in the Defense Ministry, and she is a pacifist, a Quaker. So it should be a delightful conversation with her. And Bridget Moix, who some of you know, who is our assistant clerk, will be moderating that discussion. Thank you, friends. Thank you so much for paying attention to this issue, for caring about it, for talking to your members of Congress. Thank you for your support of FCNL. Very, very important. And I hope you all stay well. I hope you all will come back in 2 weeks, and thank you for everything that you do for us.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Kerri.
Thank you.